She didn't wear the uniform to prove a point, just black PT shorts, an old army shirt, and a duffel slung over one shoulder. But the admin officer took one look at her and barked, "You can't wear that, not unless you're active duty." He ordered her to change or leave the base, and when she turned to go, the back of her shirt lifted just enough for someone across the room to catch sight of the tattoo inked high on her back. And then they froze, because that ink didn't come from a beachside parlor or some idle flair for symbols. That tattoo came from a mission no news outlet ever covered, one that carved itself deep into the memory of someone still in command. Want to know what that tattoo meant, and why the whole room shifted after someone saw it? Hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's begin. The New Mexico sun had barely crested the horizon when Dana Carver pulled her weathered Tacoma through the gates of Fort Ridgeline. The air was thick with the grit of dust and diesel, an unmistakable cocktail that every soldier learns to recognize in their bones. Heat shimmered already on the asphalt, and the low hum of generators whispered beneath the steady rhythm of boots on concrete. A convoy of supply trucks growled past the guardhouse, engines snarling like beasts being roused from sleep, adding their roar to the symphony of military order that never truly rested. She cut the engine and sat still, hands resting on the wheel. The parking lot ahead stretched wide and mostly empty, save for a tight cluster of government vehicles near the admin building. Through her windshield, she saw the track field where young recruits had begun to gather, their voices lifted and scattered on the dry morning wind like fragments of her own past. Some recruits were stretching, others fidgeted with their laces, humming with the nervous energy that comes before a trial. Dana glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. 46 years old. Threads of gray wound through the brown of her pulled-back hair. Lines now etched themselves around her eyes, lines that hadn't been there when she'd first earned the 3 numbers on her back. But her posture was still straight, her hands still steady. She stepped out of the truck slowly, deliberately, every movement precise, efficient, the mark of someone long accustomed to making each motion count. She wore a faded Army PT uniform, gray shirt softened by countless washes, black shorts worn thin by time. The fabric still held the faint memory of sharp creases once pressed for inspection boards and promotion reviews. The nameplate was long gone, but a shadow of stitching still whispered her name, Carver. Her dog tags caught a sliver of light, glinting beneath the collar tags she hadn't removed in 23 years, not once. To anyone watching, she probably looked like another retiree chasing a ghost, trying to stay connected to what once gave her life order, meaning, clarity. A woman clinging to a sense of mission that no longer appeared in the daily briefings. But Dana wasn't here for nostalgia. She was here because 3 weeks ago, Sergeant Major Dean had called. His voice had sounded worn, frayed by years of sand and noise and the weight of too many deployments. He'd asked if she could pace the female recruits during their annual evaluation. Need someone who knows what it means to push through when everything's falling apart, he'd said. The words carried layers far deeper than he voiced aloud. Dana heard them all. She'd said yes before he even finished asking. Not because she longed for the Army, though she did sometimes, with a slow ache that nested deep in her ribs, but because she remembered being 19 and terrified, running beside women who didn't need to prove anything, women who showed her what strength looked like when no one was watching. She checked her gear one last time: water bottle, car keys, the folded authorization papers that should have made this visit simple. In her duffel, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was something else. A photograph from 2000. 5 soldiers, smiling like fools, standing outside a forward operating base that hadn't existed in over a decade. 4 of those faces had never aged past. That day, the admin building loomed ahead, all concrete and regulations. Dana pushed through the heavy glass doors into a wall of artificially chilled air that raised goosebumps on her sun-warmed skin. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Beige walls were plastered with safety posters and outdated announcements. A banner, its colors faded by time, declared excellence in all we do above a bulletin board cluttered with duty rosters and training calendars. The floor beneath her boots was that familiar institutional linoleum, dull from time though, polished by decades of determined souls. Behind the counter, a young specialist looked up from his screen. His expression shifted, boredom giving way to polite confusion. He had the soft, untested look of someone who hadn't seen fire, hadn't felt the weight that settles into your shoulders after you've pulled the trigger and taken return fire. His nameplate read SPC Morrison J in crisp black letters. "Morning, ma'am. Can I help you?" Dana approached with steady confidence, her boots whispering softly across the floor. She pulled the folded papers from her pocket, each crease perfect. "Dana Carver. I'm here for training support. Should be on the volunteer roster." Morrison scanned the papers with half-interest, the way people do when routine dulls the senses. Behind him, two civilian staffers shuffled paperwork, their conversation soft, threaded with laughter. The smell of burnt coffee wafted from a corner machine. Government tissue brew. Left too long on the burner. "Huh." Morrison frowned at his screen. "ICAD." Carver listed, but his eyes flicked to her shirt. "Ma'am, I don't think that uniform's authorized unless you're currently assigned to the base." One of the civilian women looked over. She didn't bother to lower her voice. "Policy's pretty clear," she said flatly. "Can't just wear uniform pieces because you used to serve." Her colleague chimed in with a scoff. "You'd think people would know better. Playing dress up doesn't make you active duty again." Dana didn't flinch. She didn't respond. She stood like a stone, like she'd stood through worse, as Morrison clicked deeper into the system. The smell of scorched coffee blended with the antiseptic tang of floor cleaner. "I'll need to check with the supervisor," Morrison finally said, disappearing into a side office. Through the glass, Dana watched the recruits warming up, their limbs moving with the uncertain eagerness of youth. Some of them glanced toward the building, their eyes flicking across the windows. Curiosity brief and fleeting sparkled in their faces. When Morrison returned, he wasn't alone. Lieutenant Kalen strode out with that purposeful urgency of an officer who believes the world revolves around their checklist. Early 30s, uniform starched and sharp, boots shining with obsessive perfection. Confidence radiated off him in rehearsed waves, confidence that had never yet been tested. "In true chaos, Ms. Carver," he said with polished courtesy, extending a hand. "I understand there's some confusion about your participation today." Dana shook his hand. Firm and calm, her grip was calloused and sure, startling in its quiet strength. "Sergeant First Class Dana Carver, retired. I'm cleared to support." The evaluation. Kalen scanned her paperwork. The sunlight touched the brass on his collar, casting small bars of shadow on his name tape. His eyes traced the lines of her authorization with bureaucratic precision. "This appears to be more of a recommendation than an actual order," he said, tone gentle but unbending. "Regulation AR 670-1 is clear about uniform wear. PTs are restricted to active duty personnel on official assignment." He gestured toward Morrison, who produced a folded base T-shirt sealed in plastic, a generic civilian safe option navy blue with Fort Ridge line printed plainly across the chest. "We'd be glad to have you out there." Kalen continued smoothly, "Inappropriate attire. Otherwise, base policy." He let the words dangle. The threat nestled quietly beneath the smile. Dana looked at the offered shirt, then at him. She didn't argue, didn't plead her case, didn't defend the right she'd already earned in sweat and blood. Silence stretched, taut and heavy. The lights buzzed overhead. Outside, Cadence calls echoed in the sun-soaked air. She simply nodded, bent down to pick up her duffel bag, turned toward the door. That's when it happened. As she leaned forward, her shirt lifted just slightly. The fabric stretched taut across her back, revealing what lay beneath, ink etched deep into weathered skin. 3 numbers, 1375***. The tattoo wasn't decorative. It wasn't a memorial, nor a pretty phrase. Just numbers, stark, angled, deliberate, branded into her like truth itself. Below the numbers, almost hidden in shadow, was a stylized owl with its wings spread, perched above crossed swords. Morrison didn't see it. He was already turning away. Kalen straightened his collar, satisfied that order had been restored. But Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, passing by with a clipboard, froze mid-step. His eyes locked on the ink. His face drained of color. The clipboard slipped from his hand and hit The floor with a clatter that echoed through the hallway. Rodriguez had seen that tatta before, in briefings sealed with layers of classification. In after-action reports, he wasn't supposed to remember. He'd been a young corporal then, working intelligence, parsing redacted sentences, trying to guess what the blacked-out lines meant. Most reports had blurred into white noise, but not those. Detachment 1375, Night Owl Group. The unit that held the Northern Gate fallback when everything collapsed. The unit that saved a NATO convoy by fighting for 43 minutes. Alone and surrounded. The unit that was later erased from official records because what they did couldn't be acknowledged. Too sensitive, too messy, too heroic for paperwork. Rodriguez stood frozen, heart pounding, watching Dana disappear through the doors. She moved like she always had, measured, calm, precise. He wanted to speak, to explain, to tell them who she really was. Instead, he turned and hurried toward the back offices. Clipboard forgotten, hand already reaching for a phone call he wasn't supposed to make but absolutely had to. Outside, Dana found a quiet place on the bleachers near the track. She set down her duffel, the sun rising higher, casting the world in brass and shadow. She watched the recruits, watched their forms, their movements, their earnestness. She didn't sulk, didn't brood. She just sat, calm and steady, patient, as the desert itself, watching the next generation prepare to carry the weight. They couldn't yet imagine the story inked into her skin. A breeze stirred and caught the hem of her shirt, lifting it just enough to leave the tattoo visible, a trio of numbers that carried a history most would never know. But Dana had learned long ago that recognition wasn't something you demanded. It was something you earned, one quiet moment at a time, without fanfare or expectation. Inside the admin building, Rodriguez had slipped into an office marked Communications. Authorized personnel only. He locked the door behind him, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the secure line. The office was a box of stale air and burnt coffee. The smell of old paper thick in the corners. Outside the single window, the motor pool stirred with life, mechanics crawling beneath hoods, engines already grumbling under the rising sun. Rodriguez dialed a number he'd memorized, but never thought he'd use, a number given in a classified packet that had been burned after reading. It rang only twice. A crisp voice answered. No name, no rank, just ice-cold precision. Command liaison. Rodriguez swallowed, the dryness in his mouth clinging to every word. Sir, this is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez at Fort Ridgeline. I need to report a situation involving a possible classified personnel identification. The pause on the other end stretched out, tense, charged. Behind the line, Rodriguez could make out the muffled clicks of keyboards, the hushed murmur of people doing work that never appeared in reports. Go ahead. Sergeant, this line is secure. We have a volunteer. Here, retired female. She's got ink. That, Rodriguez faltered. Images from those briefings flashing through his mind, redacted names, faded maps, whispered speculation in dark rooms. Sir, she's got Detachment 1375 marked on her, clear as day, with the owl insignia. Another silence. Longer now. Rodriguez could feel the shift happening in some room far away. Gears turning, systems unlocking, layers of clearance being bypassed. Are you certain of the identification, Sergeant? Yes, sir. Dead certain. I've seen those marks in classified material. This isn't some stolen valor thing. This is real. Understood. What's her current status with base personnel? They asked her to leave, sir. Uniform violation. Some lieutenant thought she was playing dress up. The silence that followed came with a weight Rodriguez could feel in his chest. He heard the shuffle of papers, the low tones of voices not meant for public hearing. Sergeant Rodriguez, the voice returned, steel behind every syllable. You will immediately inform your commanding officer that this individual is to be treated with full courtesy and given any assistance she requires. This comes from levels you don't need to know about. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Absolutely. And Sergeant, this conversation never happened. But if anyone disrespects that woman again, they'll answer to people who don't wear name tapes. The line went dead. The receiver clicked back into place with a finality that made Rodriguez's Hands shake harder than before. 10 minutes later, Major Ronson strode out of the admin building like a man with a mission stitched into his bones. Fort Ridgeline's training officer, Ronson was the real kind, his uniform crisp, his boots scuffed, his presence carved by combat, not committee meetings. He didn't need to shout to command attention. He just was the authority in any room he entered. He found Lieutenant Kalin still standing at the front desk, flipping through volunteer files with the quiet smugness of someone who believed he'd just upheld protocol with surgical precision. Ronson's voice landed like a round fired too close to the ear. "Lieutenant, I understand we had an issue with a volunteer authorization." Kalin straightened quickly, his chest puffed slightly. "Yes, sir. Uniform regulation compliance. I handled it appropriately." Ronson didn't flinch. He laid a printed document flat on the counter. Its header was stamped with military formality. Service verification. Sergeant First Class Dana Carver. Special clearance for training support activities. Valid through end of quarter. This has been in your inbox since Tuesday." Ronson said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, but sharper than any reprimand. "Aye, sir." "There's a lot of paperwork," Kalin stammered, color draining from his face. You must have failed to do your job properly," Ronson cut in, his tone frigid. "Which means you challenged the authorization of a decorated veteran because you couldn't be bothered to read your email through the wide window." Dana was still visible. She hadn't moved from the bleachers. Her body remained perfectly still, her attention fixed on the recruits, like she was tracking the wind itself. Ronson folded the document neatly and tucked it into his pocket. "I'm going to fix this. And Lieutenant," "Yes, sir. The next time you think about playing uniform police with someone you don't know, maybe ask yourself if you're qualified to make that judgment call." Then Ronson turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Kalin behind, pale and suddenly aware that some mistakes leave dents that never fully buff out of a career. Dana saw him coming before his boots hit the edge of the field. She didn't shift, didn't adjust her posture, but her eyes lifted. Colonel Ford was beside him now, moving with that quiet inevitability of a man whose decisions had carried lives in their shadow. Colonel Ford, Fort Ridgeline's commanding officer, tall, broad-shouldered, his close-cropped hair streaked with silver. He wore his uniform like it had grown on him. The ribbons on his chest didn't just speak, they shouted of places not found on tourist maps, of choices made when there were no good options left. He stopped 6 feet from where she sat, his hands folded behind his back. Dana didn't stand. She simply looked up, those same steady eyes that had stared down rifles and RPGs, that had seen friends breathe their last. In the choking heat of a firefight, the recruits around the track noticed the change in atmosphere. Conversations faded, heads turned. Something was shifting in the air. "Sergeant Carver," Ford said, his voice deliberate, each word precise and heavy enough to anchor in stone. "That ink on your back, where'd you earn it?" Dana's tone didn't rise, just a calm reply, sharp as a knife slicing through the stillness. "Northern Gate, April 2000. NATO fallback route. I was rear fire team." Ford nodded once, slow, his jaw clenched just slightly. His eyes looked through her and beyond her to a memory that had never really faded. "My brother was convoy security that day," Ford said, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Private First Class Nathan Ford. You pulled him out after the second IED, held the flank when everyone else fell back." Dana's expression twitched, barely noticeable. Her voice rasped when she replied, the edge of old pain surfacing. "Didn't know who was in the lead truck," she said quietly. "Didn't matter." Ford studied her for a long moment. There, it was buried deep behind her eyes. Not pride, not ego, just grief carefully stored. Pain placed on a shelf because there hadn't been time to let it show. "He made it home because of you," Ford said. "Lived another 16 years, got married, had kids, died peacefully in his sleep last winter." Dana's breath caught. Just for a second, her voice barely broke above a whisper. "Good," she said. "That's good." Then Ford did something that made every soldier on that base take notice. He brought his right hand up in a crisp, formal salute, sharp, clean, unmistakable, right there, on the edge of the track, he saluted a woman in a faded PT shirt, dust still clinging to her sleeves, no rank on display. Every head turned, even the recruits, frozen mid-stretch, stood straighter. Ford held the salute longer than regulation required. When he dropped it, his voice carried across the training field like a command from on high. If Sergeant Carver wants to wear that uniform, she wears it. If she wants to support our training, she supports it. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can come explain it to me, personally. He turned slightly, glancing back toward the admin building, where Lieutenant Kalin now stood behind the glass. Pale and still. Policy, Ford said, letting the word linger in the dry air. Serves the mission, not the other way around. Then, softer now, as he faced Dana once more, his tone changed, warmer, respectful. If you'll walk with me, Sergeant, I'd like to make this right. Dana stood, shouldering her duffel with a quiet ease honed over decades. Lead the way, sir. They walked side by side, commander and non-com, veteran and vet, soldier and soldier, not divided by rank, but joined by the one thing that mattered most. Earned respect. Inside the hush of Ford's office, with the blinds drawn and the door shut, what followed was brief and without pretense. Ford pulled up files on his computer, files that most officers didn't even know existed. Page after page of sealed records, battle summaries that had never been published. Detachment 1375. He murmured, eyes scanning. Night Owl Group, disbanded after Northern Gate. Redacted, sealed, lost to paper. Dana sat quietly across from him, hands folded in her lap. That was the idea, she said. You saved 17 NATO personnel. He said, still scrolling. Held the line for 43 minutes. No resupply, no backup, no one coming. Someone had to. You were awarded a Bronze Star, he added, looking at her at last. It's sitting in a file. 3 people in the Pentagon have clearance to access, don't need a medal, Dana said softly. The ones who mattered made it home. That's enough, Ford nodded once. He reached for the printer, signed a sheet with his authorization code, and handed it to her. Updated clearance. Authorization in black and white. You wanted to train with our people, Ford said. You train with them, in whatever uniform you're comfortable wearing. Asterisk. Dana folded the document with a practiced precision, a single clean line down its center, and tucked it into her duffel without a word wasted. Appreciate it, sir. Her voice was calm, firm, respectful. They walked out together, side by side, past the same admin staffers who only moments ago had chuckled about her playing dress up, past the same specialist who had questioned her right to be there like she was trespassing on memories. But now no one spoke. Some stiffened instinctively. Others suddenly found pressing tasks to occupy them elsewhere. The air in the corridor had shifted, charged now, reverent in a way that didn't need to be taught. Out on the track, the recruits had completed their warm-ups and now clustered together, forming ranks with that buzzing mix of nerves and anticipation. Their faces, still youthfully soft despite the sunburn and sweat, tilted forward, eyes fixed ahead. They carried the energy of futures not yet tested, of dreams still wearing their first coat of polish. Colonel Ford's voice rose clear across the field, deliberate and unmistakably final. Sergeant Carver will be pacing today's run. She is cleared for any and all uniform components she chooses to wear, effective immediately. The NCO running the session snapped to attention. Yes, sir, he answered. No hesitation, no ambiguity. His gaze didn't even flicker toward the faded shirt and black shorts. He was looking only at Dana. Now, and what she had just become in the eyes of every soldier present. Ford continued, turning slightly toward the gathering of officers nearby. New policy goes into effect today. Prior service veterans who support official training events are authorized appropriate uniform elements at the command's discretion. Questions about that discretion, he added, his voice growing sharper. With each syllable, come directly to me. Lieutenant Kalin had emerged from the admin building, his face pale beneath the weight of shame and sudden hindsight. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the span of one. He took a tentative step forward. Sergeant Carver, he began, his voice uneven. I want to apologize. I didn't understand. Dana lifted a hand gently, stopping him with a gesture. That was neither angry nor dismissive but simply final. You didn't ask. The recruits were quiet now, their young bodies stilled, their expressions caught somewhere between curiosity and awe. They knew, even if they didn't have the full story, that something important had happened. Whispers rippled like static through the lines. "That's her," someone murmured. "Did you see the colonel salute her?" Dana didn't wait for more. No speeches, no declarations. She dropped her duffel by the bleachers, stretched once fluid. Efficientan jogged toward the track with a grace that came from years of doing exactly what needed to be done, no more, no less. When the formation took off, she wasn't just part of the line, she led it. Her pace was deliberate, steady, unrelenting. Her stride cut clean across the asphalt, smooth as glass. She didn't push herself. She didn't have to. The young soldiers behind her found themselves running harder than they'd expected, lungs pulling dry air, legs beginning to burn. But Dana, she ran like a metronome, no strain, no wasted movement. Her breathing remained level, her posture didn't sag, her eyes never left the curve ahead of her. Lap after lap, she moved like the desert wind, constant and quiet, but impossible to outrun. By the second lap, no one questioned her place. By the third, they were trying to learn from it. Colonel Ford stood at the edge of the track, arms folded, watching each pass. His training NCO leaned toward him with a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Think she's gonna let them catch her, sir?" Ford's eyes didn't leave Dana's silhouette as it swept around the necks. "Bend, only if she wants to." The run ended with Dana breathing easy, while more than half the formation was bent over, hands on their knees, gasping against the desert heat. She had paced them exactly right, fast enough to stretch their limits, controlled enough to keep them from breaking, and with the kind of composure that reminded them all what true professionalism looked like. As the recruits wandered off toward showers and chow, their laughter and chatter rising again like dust in the wind, Dana drifted toward the concrete steps outside the motor pool. She sat, elbows on her knees, watching the bass slip into its midday rhythm. The sun now blazed from overhead, gilding every metal surface in brass and shadow. The asphalt shimmered like glass, heat waves rising in lazy spirals. Somewhere out beyond the hangars, a helicopter turned over its rotors in a slow maintenance check, the thump 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 echoing across the sand like a memory. Asterisk. A young private approached cautiously, clutching a water bottle like it was the only solid thing anchoring her to the earth. She looked about 19, fresh out of basic, judging by the crispness of her blouse and the untouched polish on her boots. Her steps were hesitant, careful. "Ma'am," she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "If it's okay to ask, were you really with Night Owl?" Dana lifted her eyes, soft but unreadable. She studied the girl's face, her worry, her curiosity, and the quiet awe barely hidden behind the question. A long breath passed. "I was." The private took a half step closer, glancing over her shoulder, lowering her voice. "My cousin was in the National Guard, served in Afghanistan. He said there were stories about that unit, about what happened at the Northern Gate, but he thought it was just classified rumors. Ghost stories officers tell to scare the new guys." Dana's eyes didn't blink, but they dimmed just slightly. "It was classified," she said. Her voice carried something heavier than fact. "Supposed to stay that way." The girl looked stricken and fascinated. "Did you really hold the position alone, against a whole company?" Dana was quiet for a long moment. She looked out past the motor pool toward the mountains in the distance, their jagged peaks shimmering in the heat like they were part of another world, older, untouched by men and their machines. The kind of place where time didn't matter. "Not alone," she said finally. Her voice was low but certain, the kind of voice that didn't ask to be believed. "Never alone." She paused, her throat tightening with words that weighed more than her uniform ever had. "But the others," her jaw worked slightly. "The others didn't make it back." The young soldier's expression fell, curiosity fading into something deeper, something close to reverence. She had come looking for a story. Now she saw a burden. "I'm sorry," she whispered, as if sorrow could rewrite history. Dana shook her head, gentle but firm. "They didn't need pity," she said. "They needed time. When they ran out of time, they gave me mine. They gave everyone theirs. The private stood silent, the weight of that truth pressing into her chest. Her hands trembled slightly on the water bottle, and then, after a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, she finally asked what had been eating at her since the moment she watched Dana run. "Why'd you come back? After everything, after what they took from you?" Dana stood slowly, brushing her palms on her shorts with that same practiced control, as if even that motion carried meaning. She looked the girl in the eye, not with superiority, not with distance, but with something quieter, older, something that carried the ache of fire and the resilience of stone. "Because someone's got to show you what quiet strength looks like," she said. "What it means to serve without needing recognition. What it costs to carry that weight and why it's worth carrying anyway." She turned her gaze to the base, watching the flag ripple high over the desert, soldiers moving between buildings, life rolling forward on rhythms that never paused. "You're going to face things out there no manual will prepare you for. Days when the chain of command disappears, missions that go sideways, moments when good people will look to you for a decision that doesn't feel possible." Her voice stayed steady, measured, calm, without a trace of bitterness. "And when that happens, you'll remember that quiet strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the one still standing when the noise stops, without another word." She turned toward her truck, the same sun-faded Tacoma she'd arrived in. It hadn't changed in those few hours, but somehow it seemed different now. As she climbed in and started the engine, the recruits she'd paced earlier were still clustered near the barracks, pointing, talking, sharing pieces of a story they only partly understood. Dana pulled away, the gravel crunching beneath her tires. As she turned down the road behind the base, past the motor pool, past the training fields, toward the endless stretch of desert beyond, in her rearview mirror, Fort Ridgeline grew smaller behind her, but it felt more solid now, anchored, settled. Something unspoken had been made right. No one stopped her. No one dared question her place anymore. And the next time someone mentioned Detachment 1375, it wouldn't be with nervous laughter or whispered rumor. It would be in silence, the respectful kind carried by those who had finally come to understand what real service looked like. Have you ever seen someone hold their ground quietly while others mock them? Share this story with someone who knows what quiet strength really means. And hit that subscribe button if you believe veterans deserve our respect, not just on holidays, but every single day they walk among us.